The shuttle doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Captain Yellen Morrow stepped onto Nexus Station 7 for the first time in her life. The station was massive, and it stretched out before her like a small city floating in the darkness of space. Lights blinked everywhere, and aliens of every shape and size moved through the corridors like rivers of strange colors and sounds. But Yellen was not alone on this journey. Walking beside her with calm and steady steps was Coda, her German shepherd. He was a beautiful animal with a coat of black and tan fur and eyes the color of warm amber. He weighed 90 pounds and stood tall with his ears pointing straight up as he looked around at this new and strange place. His nose twitched as he smelled 1,000 new scents, and his tail wagged slowly as he stayed close to his human. The aliens in the arrival hall stopped what they were doing and stared at the pair. Many of them had never seen a dog before, and they whispered to each other in clicking and hissing, languages that Yellen could not understand. She kept her head high and walked forward with confidence, even though she could feel their eyes on her. A tall insectoid creature approached her with long clicking legs and huge compound eyes that reflected the station. Lights like broken mirrors. This was Ambassador Thrix of the Velnoxy, and he was one of the most important diplomats on the station. He stood 7 feet tall, and his body was covered in a hard shell that gleamed with shades of deep purple and green. "Captain Morrow," he said in a voice that sounded like 2 rocks rubbing together, "we welcome you to Nexus Station 7. You are the new human liaison, and we have heard much about your species." Yellen nodded and smiled politely. "Thank you, Ambassador Thrix. I am honored to be here, and I look forward to working with all the species on this station." But Thrix was not looking at her anymore. His compound eyes had shifted down to stare at Coda, who sat calmly at Yellen's feet. The dog looked back at the alien without fear, and his tail gave a small wag. "What is this creature?" Thrix asked, and his mandibles clicked together in a way that sounded almost like laughter. "This is Coda," Yellen said proudly. "He is my companion. A dog from Earth." "A companion?" Thrix repeated the word as if it tasted strange in his mouth. He turned to his aides who stood behind him, and they all made that same clicking sound. "The human brings a companion animal, a creature that requires feeding and cleaning and constant attention. How very inefficient. How very sentimental." The aides clicked louder, and Yellen realized they were laughing at her. She felt her face grow warm, but she kept her smile in place. She had been warned that aliens might not understand the bond between humans and their pets, but she had not expected them to mock her so openly on her very first day. Coda seemed to sense her discomfort because he stood up and pressed his body against her leg. His warmth was a comfort, and she reached down to scratch behind his ears. He looked up at her with those amber eyes, and she felt better immediately. "He may seem inefficient to you, Ambassador," Yellen said calmly, "but he is very important to me." Thrix made a dismissive gesture with one of his many arms. "Important? In what way? Does it perform calculations? Does it repair machinery? Does it fight your battles?" "He is my friend," Yellen said simply. This time, the laughter was even louder. Thrix's aides could not contain themselves, and even the Ambassador himself let out a series of rapid clicks that echoed through the arrival hall. Other aliens nearby turned to watch, and soon the whole area was filled with the sounds of alien amusement. Yellen stood firm and waited for them to finish. She had faced worse than laughter in her career, and she would not let this break her spirit. When the noise died down, Thrix leaned closer to look at Coda. His compound eyes examined the dog from every angle. "On my world, we create servant drones from genetic material. They obey without question, and they never require affection or companionship. This is the efficient way. This is the logical way. But humans choose to burden themselves with creatures that give nothing back. It is most fascinating. You are a very strange species." "Perhaps," Yellen said quietly, but we like being strange." Thrix straightened up and gestured toward the corridor that led deeper into the station. "Come then, Captain Morrow. I will show you to your quarters. Your creature may come as well, but please keep it under control. We do not want it frightening the other delegates." Yellen nodded and began to walk with Coda at her side. As they moved through the corridors, she noticed that every alien they passed stopped to stare at the dog. Some looked curious, and some looked disgusted, and some looked almost afraid. But none of them looked at Coda with respect. They all saw him as a strange and useless thing that the human had brought for no good reason. But Yellen knew something that none of these aliens understood. Coda was not just a pet. He was not just a companion. He was the result of 40,000 years of partnership between humans and wolves. Long ago on the frozen plains of Earth, humans and wolves had found each other, and they had made a choice. They had chosen to survive together. The wolves became dogs, and the dogs became family, and together humans and dogs had conquered the world. Coda carried that ancient bond in his blood. Every instinct in his body was tuned to protect and serve his human. He could sense danger before it arrived, and he could read emotions that Yellen herself did not know she was feeling. He was not a burden. He was a gift from the past, a living promise that said you are not alone. As they walked through the station, Coda's amber eyes moved constantly. He watched the aliens who watched him, and he memorized their scents and their movements. His ears turned like little radar dishes catching every sound. He looked calm and friendly, but beneath that gentle surface was something ancient and powerful. Something that these aliens had never seen before. They reached Yellen's quarters, and Thrix left them with another round of clicking laughter. When the door closed behind him, Yellen let out a long breath and knelt down beside her dog. "Don't worry, boy," she whispered as she hugged him tight. "They don't understand you now, but someday they will. Someday they will see what you really are." Coda licked her face and wagged his tail happily. He did not care what the aliens thought of him. He only cared about his human, and he would stay by her side no matter what. That was the promise his ancestors had made, and that was the promise he would keep. Outside the quarters, the station hummed with life and activity. Aliens went about their business, never knowing that something extraordinary had just arrived. The human and her dog had come to Nexus Station 7, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. 3 weeks passed on Nexus Station 7, and Yellen worked hard every single day. She attended meetings and diplomatic functions, and she spoke with representatives from dozens of alien species. Her job was to build bridges between humanity and the galactic community, and she took that job very seriously. But everywhere she went, the laughter followed. The aliens could not stop talking about her dog. They whispered behind her back, and they pointed at Coda whenever he walked through the corridors. Some of them even came up to her just to ask questions that were really insults dressed in polite words. The worst of them were the Crethali. The Crethali were a warrior species, and they were proud and fierce and dangerous. They stood 8 feet tall with bodies covered in thick scales that glowed with soft bioluminescent light. Their heads were crowned with sharp fins that rose and fell with their emotions, and their eyes burned with the fire of a species that had conquered 100 worlds. Commander Sithax was their leader on the station, and he seemed to take special pleasure in mocking Yellen's companion. He would find her at diplomatic dinners, and he would stand over her with his fins raised high and his scales flashing bright colors. "Tell me, human," he said one evening as Yellen sat at a long table filled with alien delegates, "does your beast serve any purpose at all? Does it fight for you? Does it hunt for you? Or does it simply exist and consume your resources?" Yellen looked up at him calmly. Coda sat beside her chair with his head resting on his paws and his eyes half closed. He looked peaceful and sleepy, but Yellen knew better. She knew he was listening to every word. "Coda is my friend," she said in the same simple way she always did. He keeps me company, and he makes me happy. Sithax threw back his head and laughed. His scales flashed bright orange and red, which many found something very amusing. Friendship. Happiness. These are the reasons you drag this creature across the stars. How wonderfully weak you humans are. The other aliens at the table joined in the laughter. Ambassador Thrix clicked his mandibles, and a group of small furry creatures called the Malloy made high-pitched squeaking sounds. Even the serving drones seemed to pause as if they too found the situation funny. On my world, Sithax continued proudly, we keep war beasts. Great terrible creatures with claws like swords and teeth like daggers. We break them through pain and fear until they obey without question. They are weapons and nothing more. When they are used up, we discard them and find new ones. That is the proper way to use animals. Not this soft and sentimental nonsense. Yellen felt anger rising in her chest, but she pushed it down. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her upset. Your war beasts sound very impressive, Commander, she said politely, but I prefer my way. Your way is weakness, Sithax said, and his fins flattened against his head in a gesture of contempt. Your way is why humans will never be taken seriously among the stars. You are too soft, too emotional, too attached to things that do not matter. He walked away laughing, and the other aliens returned to their conversations. Yellen sat quietly and ate her food even though it tasted like ashes in her mouth. Under the table, she felt Koda's warm body press against her legs, and she was grateful for his silent support. Later that night, she walked through the station's observation deck with Koda at her side. The great windows showed a view of distant stars and colorful nebulae, and it was one of the most beautiful sights Yellen had ever seen. But tonight she could not enjoy it. Tonight she felt tired and sad. Maybe they're right, boy, she said quietly as she sat down on a bench, and Koda jumped up to sit beside her. Maybe I shouldn't have brought you here. Maybe you would have been happier back on Earth. Koda looked at her with his amber eyes, and he whined softly. Then he put his head on her lap and licked her hand as if to say that he was exactly where he wanted to be. Yellen smiled and scratched behind his ears. You're right. We're a team. We stick together no matter what. She thought about what Sithax had said about war beasts, and she felt a chill run down her spine. The idea of keeping animals through pain and fear was horrible to her. On Earth, humans had learned long ago that love and trust were stronger than cruelty. That was why dogs were so loyal. They loved their humans because their humans loved them back. The Krethali and the other aliens did not understand this. They saw Koda as a useless burden because they could not imagine a relationship based on mutual affection. They thought strength came from domination and control, but humans knew a different truth. True strength came from bonds that could not be broken. As the weeks went on, the mocking continued, but Yellen noticed something interesting. Koda never seemed bothered by the aliens' laughter. He walked through the station with his head high and his tail wagging as if he owned the place. And slowly some of the aliens began to treat him differently. The Malloy, who were small and timid creatures, started to watch Koda with curiosity instead of amusement. They saw how gentle he was and how he never threatened anyone, and they began to wonder if perhaps they had misjudged him. A few of them even came close enough to sniff at his fur, and Koda let them with patience and kindness. But the Krethali and the Volnoxi remained as scornful as ever. They continued to laugh and mock, and they made sure everyone knew that they thought the human and her pet were ridiculous. Commander Sithax especially seemed determined to prove that Koda was worthless. He brought it up at every meeting and every dinner until Yellen was sick of hearing about it. One day, Ambassador Thrix announced that a special expedition was being planned. A group of delegates would travel to a nearby moon called Valith 3 to survey it as a possible colony site. It was a great honor to be chosen for such a mission, and representatives from every major species would be included. The human may come as well, Thrix said, with his mandibles clicking in that familiar mocking rhythm, and she may bring her companion if she wishes. Perhaps the creature would enjoy a walk on a new world. It can sniff the alien plants and chase the alien butterflies. The chamber filled with laughter, and Yellen gritted her teeth. But she nodded and accepted the invitation because she knew it was important for humanity to be represented. Coda sat beside her through the whole meeting. His eyes moved from face to face, and he watched the aliens who laughed at his human. He memorized their scents and their voices, and something ancient stirred in his blood. The wolves who had first approached human campfires 40,000 years ago had made a promise. They had promised to protect and serve, and that promise had passed down through countless generations. Coda felt that promise in his heart, even though he could not put it into words. He was not just a pet. He was not just a companion. He was a guardian and a warrior and a friend. And when the time came, he would show these laughing aliens exactly what that meant. The expedition to Valith 3 was 3 days away, and Coda would be ready. The shuttle descended through thick clouds, and Yellen watched through the window as the forest moon of Valith 3 appeared below them. It was a beautiful world covered in dense jungle that stretched from horizon to horizon. The trees were massive, with trunks as wide as buildings and leaves that glowed with soft blue and purple light. Strange flying creatures soared between the branches, and somewhere in the distance, a waterfall tumbled down from a great cliff. Coda sat beside her with his nose pressed against the window. His tail wagged with excitement, and he whined softly as he watched this new world grow larger and larger. "Easy, boy," Yellen said with a smile as she scratched his ears. "We'll be down there soon." The shuttle landed in a clearing, and the delegates stepped out one by one. Ambassador Thrix led the group with his aides clicking nervously behind him. Commander Sithax walked with his scales glowing bright green, which meant he was feeling confident and proud. The small Malloy hopped along at the back of the group, and they looked around with wide, frightened eyes. There were 15 delegates in total, and they had come to survey the moon for possible colonization. Scientists carried scanning equipment, and diplomats carried data pads, and everyone seemed excited about the possibilities. But there was one rule that everyone had to follow. This was a diplomatic mission, so no weapons were allowed. Every delegate had been searched before boarding the shuttle, and anything that could be used to harm another being had been left behind on the station. Yellen thought this was a foolish rule. Valith 3 was an unexplored world, and no one knew what dangers might be waiting in those dark forests. But she kept her concerns to herself, because she was only a human, and the other species did not care what she thought. The group moved out from the shuttle and began their survey. They walked along a path that had been cleared by drones, and they stopped every few meters to take readings and collect samples. The forest was alive with strange sounds, clicking and buzzing and deep rumbling calls that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Coda stayed close to Yellen, and his ears moved constantly as he listened to every noise. His nose twitched as he smelled the alien scents, and his body was tense with alertness. Something about this place made him uneasy, and he did not like it at all. "Your creature seems nervous," Sithax said, with a mocking laugh as he walked past Yellen. "Perhaps it is scared of the pretty flowers." "He senses something," Yellen said quietly. "We should be careful." "Careful?" Sithax laughed even louder, and his scales flashed orange. "This is a survey mission, not a battle. There is nothing to fear from plants and insects." But Coda knew better. His ancestors had survived on ancient Earth by learning to recognize danger before it arrived. They had developed instincts that could sense predators hiding in the shadows, and those instincts were screaming at him now. Something was watching them. Something was following them. Something was hungry. The group continued deeper into the forest, and the light grew dimmer as the massive trees blocked out the sky. The air was thick and humid, and it smelled of rotten growing things. The sounds of the forest seemed louder now and more threatening. Then, without warning, the perimeter sensors went dead. Ambassador Thrix looked at his datapad with confusion. Strange. The sensors have stopped working. There must be some kind of interference. Should we return to the shuttle? One of the Mellowee asked in a trembling voice. Nonsense, Sivak said with a dismissive wave of his clawed hand. We have barely begun our survey. We will continue. Yellen felt a chill run down her spine. Every instinct she had was telling her that something was wrong. She looked down at Coda and saw that he had stopped walking. He was standing completely still with his ears flat against his head and his lips pulled back to show his teeth. Coda, what is it? She whispered, and then she heard it. A deep rumbling growl that seemed to come from the darkness itself. The bushes to their left began to shake, and something massive was moving through the undergrowth. What was that? Ambassador Thrix asked, and his voice was higher than usual. No one answered because no one knew. They all stood frozen as the growling grew louder and closer. The Mellowee began to squeak with terror, and even Commander Sithax looked uncertain for the first time. Then it burst from the shadows. It was a Garrix, a native predator of Valeth 3 and most dangerous creature on the moon. It was enormous, at least 600 pounds of muscle and fury. Its body was covered in dark scales that blended perfectly with the forest shadows, and its eyes glowed red with hunger and rage. It had 4 massive legs ending in claws as long as knives, and its mouth was filled with teeth that could crush bone like paper. The creature let out a roar that shook the trees, and the delegates scattered in every direction. Ambassador Thrix tried to run, but his legs would not obey him. He stood frozen with fear as the monster approached. The Mellowee disappeared into the undergrowth screaming. Commander Sithax reached for a weapon that was not there, and his scales went pale with terror. The Garrix looked around at the fleeing aliens, and then its glowing eyes locked onto a single target. Yellen. She had been separated from the group when everyone ran. She stood alone near a cluster of thick roots, and she was too far from the shuttle to escape. The predator began to move toward her with slow, deliberate steps. It was in no hurry because it knew its prey had nowhere to go. Yellen backed away, and her foot caught on a root. She stumbled and fell hard onto the ground. Pain shot through her ankle, and she knew immediately that she could not run. The Garrix growled with satisfaction and crouched low, preparing to charge. This was it. This was how she was going to die. Alone on an alien world, eaten by a monster, while diplomats ran away screaming. She closed her eyes and waited for the end. But then she heard something that made her eyes fly open. It was a sound she knew better than any other sound in the universe. It was low and rumbling and ancient. It was the sound of 40,000 years of loyalty and love. Coda was growling. She turned her head and saw her dog standing between her and the Garrix. His legs were planted wide and his body was tense. His lips were pulled back to reveal every tooth in his mouth, and his amber eyes burned with a fire she had never seen before. The Garrix stopped and stared at this small creature that dared to challenge it. The predator was confused. No prey had ever stood against it before. It roared again, trying to frighten the dog away. But Coda did not move. He stood his ground, and his growl grew louder. He was not prey. He was not a victim. He was something the Garrix had never encountered before. He was a protector. The monster and the dog faced each other in the dim light of the alien forest. One was massive and terrible. The other was small and brave. And somewhere between them, Yellen lay on the ground, watching as her loyal friend prepared to fight. A battle he could not possibly win. "Coda, no!" She screamed. But it was too late. The Garrix had made its decision. It was going to kill this annoying little creature, and then it was going to eat the human. It bunched its powerful legs and prepared to charge, and Coda prepared to meet it. The Garrix charged. 600 pounds of muscle and rage exploded forward with terrifying speed. The ground shook beneath its massive claws, and its roar filled the forest with the sound of death. Its red eyes burned with hunger as it closed the distance between itself and its prey. But Coda was already moving. The German shepherd launched himself forward like a missile. His powerful legs drove him across the ground faster than any animal on this world had ever seen. His ears were flat against his head, and his eyes were locked on his target. Every muscle in his body was focused on a single purpose: protect his human. The two predators collided in midair. 90 pounds of loyal fury slammed into 600 pounds of alien monster. Coda's jaws found the Garrix's throat, and they clamped down with crushing force. His teeth sank into the thick scales, and he tasted hot alien blood on his tongue. The Garrix screamed in shock and pain. No creature had ever attacked it before. No prey had ever fought back. It thrashed its massive head trying to throw off this small enemy, but Coda held on with all his strength. His jaws were locked tight and nothing in the universe could make him let go. Yellen watched from the ground with tears streaming down her face. She wanted to help, but her ankle was injured and she could not stand. All she could do was watch as her beloved dog fought against a monster 10 times his size. Coda! She screamed his name, but he could not hear her. He was lost in the ancient fury of combat. The same fury that had lived in his wolf ancestors when they hunted mammoths on the frozen plains of Earth. The Garrix reared up on its hind legs and raked its front claws across Coda's body. The terrible claws tore through his fur and opened deep wounds along his side. Blood sprayed into the air, and Coda yelped in pain, but he did not release his grip. He bit down harder and shook his head with savage force. The monster stumbled and fell to the ground. It rolled over, trying to crush the dog beneath its weight, but Coda twisted away at the last moment. He lost his grip on the throat, but he immediately attacked again. This time he sank his teeth into one of the creature's legs. The Garrix kicked and thrashed, but Coda held on. His body was battered and bleeding, but his spirit was unbroken. He was not fighting to kill this monster. He knew he could not win that battle. He was fighting to buy time, to give his human a chance to escape. That was the promise. That was the ancient bond between humans and dogs. When danger came, the dog would stand between its human and death itself. And Coda would die before he broke that promise. But Yellen was not running. She was crawling through the dirt, searching for something. Anything that could help. Her hands found a fallen branch, and she threw it at the Garrix, but it bounced harmlessly off the creature's scales. She grabbed a rock and hurled it with all her strength. It struck the monster's eye, and it roared with rage. Then she saw it. Commander Sithax's emergency beacon lying on the ground where he had dropped it when he fled. It was only a few meters away, and if she could reach it, she could call for help. She dragged herself across the forest floor, ignoring the pain in her ankle. The sounds of the battle filled her ears. Growling and roaring and the horrible wet sounds of flesh being torn. She did not look back because she knew that if she saw Coda being hurt, she would lose her courage. Her fingers closed around the beacon and she pressed the emergency button. A bright red light began to flash, and she knew that help would come. But would it come in time? She turned back to the battle, and what she saw broke her heart. Coda was still fighting. His beautiful fur was matted with blood, and one of his legs was badly injured. He limped as he moved, but he never stopped attacking. He darted in to bite, and then jumped back before the Garrix could strike him. He was using every trick his ancestors had learned in 40,000 years of hunting and fighting. The Garrix was bleeding from a dozen wounds. Coda's teeth had torn through its scales in several places, and dark blood dripped onto the forest floor. The monster was confused and angry. It had never faced an enemy like this before. Prey was supposed to run. Prey was supposed to die. Prey was not supposed to fight back with such ferocious courage. But Coda was not prey. He was something far more dangerous. He was a protector who would never give up. The battle raged on and both creatures grew tired. The Garrix was losing blood, and its movements were becoming slower and clumsier. Coda was exhausted, and his wounded leg could barely support his weight. They circled each other with heaving breaths, and neither one was willing to back down. Then the Garrix made one final charge. It lunged forward with its jaws wide open, aiming to swallow the dog whole. But Coda saw it coming, and he dodged to the side. His good legs carried him out of reach just in time. The monster's jaws snapped shut on empty air. And then something happened that no alien watching would have believed. Coda did not run. He did not try to escape, even though he had the chance. Instead, he turned and limped back to stand between the Garrix and Yellen. He planted his trembling legs and raised his bloody head, and he growled at the monster with every ounce of strength he had left. The sound that came from his throat was not just a growl. It was a declaration. It said, "I am here, and I will not move." It said, "You will not touch my human." It said, "I am a wolf and a dog and a guardian, and I will die on my feet before I let you pass." The Garrix stared at this small, broken creature that refused to surrender. It had killed hundreds of animals in its life, but it had never seen anything like this. There was something in those amber eyes that made the monster hesitate. Something ancient and powerful and terrifying. It was the look of a predator. Not the kind of predator that hunted for food, but the kind that hunted to protect. The kind that would fight until its last breath for something it loved. The kind that had walked beside humans through ice ages and wars and the rise and fall of civilizations. The Garrix was an apex predator on Valith 3. Nothing on this moon could challenge it. But now it faced something from another world. Something with 40,000 years of courage bred into its bones. And for the first time in its life, the monster felt something it had never felt before. Fear. The great beast took a step backward. Its red eyes flickered with uncertainty, and its roar died in its throat. The blood loss was making it weak, and the strange small predator would not stop fighting. The Garrix made a decision that no creature on this moon had ever made before. It turned and ran. The monster disappeared into the shadows of the forest, and its footsteps faded into silence. The battle was over, and against all odds Coda had won. The brave dog stood swaying on his wounded legs. His job was done, and his human was safe. He turned to look at Yellen, and his tail gave one weak wag. Then his legs gave out, and he collapsed to the ground. "Coda!" Yellen screamed, and she dragged herself to his side. She gathered his bloody body in her arms and held him tight. His amber eyes looked up at her, and his tongue came out to lick her tears. "Good boy," she sobbed. "Good boy. You're such a good boy." In the distance, she could hear the sound of rescue shuttles approaching. Help was coming, but she did not know if it would arrive in time. All she could do was hold her brave, loyal friend and pray that he would survive. "Stay with me, boy," she whispered. "Please stay with me." And Coda's tail wagged one more time. The rescue shuttle descended through the trees and landed in the clearing with a roar of engines. Medical teams rushed out carrying equipment and stretchers, and they spread across the area searching for survivors. The forest that had been so quiet moments ago was now filled with shouting voices and flashing lights. Yellen refused to let go of Coda. The medics found her sitting in a pool of blood, cradling her dog against her chest. She was covered in dirt and tears, and she looked up at them with wild, desperate eyes. "Help him!" she screamed. "Please, you have to help him." The alien medics hesitated. They had been trained to treat dozens of species, but none of them had ever worked on an Earth dog before. They looked at each other with uncertainty while precious seconds ticked away. He's dying. Yellen sobbed. Please do something. One of the medics stepped forward. She was a Meloe with soft gray fur and gentle eyes, and she had been watching Coda for weeks on the station. She had seen how kind and patient he was, and she had wondered if perhaps the other aliens were wrong about him. Bring him to the shuttle, she said firmly. I will do what I can. They carried Coda aboard and laid him on a medical table. The Meloe medic worked quickly using scanners and instruments to assess his wounds. The cuts were deep, and he had lost a lot of blood, but his heart was still beating strong. He is a fighter, the medic said with amazement in her voice. His body refuses to give up. Yellen sat beside the table holding Coda's paw in her hands. She whispered to him, constantly telling him how brave he was and how much she loved him. And even though he was unconscious, his tail gave tiny, weak wags as if he could hear her. The shuttle lifted off and flew back toward Nexus Station 7. By the time they arrived, word had spread throughout the station about what had happened. Aliens crowded the landing bay, waiting to see the human and her dog. The same dog they had laughed at for weeks. But no one was laughing now. The medical team rushed Coda to the veterinary wing that had been hastily prepared. Doctors from a dozen species worked together to save his life. They stitched his wounds and gave him transfusions and monitored his vital signs with careful attention. It was the first time in the history of the station that so many aliens had cooperated to save a single Earth animal. Yellen waited outside the surgery room with her heart pounding in her chest. She could not sit still, so she paced back and forth until her injured ankle screamed with pain. Then she sat down for a few minutes before getting up to pace again. Ambassador Thrix approached her slowly. His compound eyes were dim, and his usually proud posture was hunched with something that looked like shame. Captain Morrow, he said quietly, I must speak with you. Yellen looked at him with exhausted eyes. What do you want, Ambassador? Thrix was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different than she had ever heard it. Soft and uncertain and almost humble. I do not understand what happened today, he admitted. Your creature was small and weak compared to the Garrick's. By every logical measure, it should have fled or died in the first seconds of combat. But it did not run. It stood and fought against impossible odds. I've never seen anything like this. He was protecting me, Yellen said simply. Yes, Thrix nodded slowly. But why? We Velnoxi create servant drones that will die for us because we program them to obey. But they have no choice in the matter. They are machines following orders. Your creature is not a machine. It chose to fight. It chose to suffer. Why would any being choose such a thing? Yellen felt tears returning to her eyes. Because he loves me. And I love him. We are bonded in a way your drones will never understand. Commander Sithax appeared beside Ambassador Thrix. His scales were dull and gray, which meant he was feeling emotions he did not know how to process. The proud warrior who had mocked Coda every day now stood with his fins flat against his head in a gesture of deep respect. On my world, we keep war beasts, he said slowly. We break them through pain and fear until they obey. But their obedience is born of terror. They fight because they are more afraid of us than they are of our enemies. If they could escape, they would flee and never return. He paused and took a deep breath. But your creature was not afraid. I saw its eyes when it faced the Garricks. There was no fear there. Only determination. Only courage. Only love. It fought not because it was forced to, but because it wanted to. Because protecting you was more important than its own survival. That is what dogs do, Yellen said quietly. That is what they have always done. For 40,000 years, dogs have stood beside humans and faced every danger with us. They have hunted with us and guarded our children and died to protect our families. They are not our slaves or our tools. They are our partners, our companions, our family. The aliens listened in stunned silence. For so long, they had believed that keeping animals for companionship was a sign of weakness, that humans were soft and sentimental for forming bonds with inferior creatures. But now they saw the truth that had been hidden from them all along. Humans had not domesticated dogs. Humans and dogs had chosen each other. They had formed an alliance based on trust and loyalty and love. The wolves who had first approached human campfires had seen something in those strange two-legged creatures. Something worth following. Something worth protecting. And humans had seen something in the wolves too. Something brave and faithful and true. Together they had conquered the world. Together they had survived ice ages and famines and wars. And now together they were reaching out to the stars. The door to the surgery room opened, and the Malawi medic stepped out. Her gray fur was stained with blood, but her eyes were bright with joy. "He will live," she announced. "The wounds were severe, but he is strong. He will need time to heal, but he will make a full recovery." Yellen burst into tears, and she would have fallen if Thrix had not caught her. She thanked the medic over and over again, and then she rushed into the room to be with her dog. Coda lay on the medical table with bandages covering his body. His eyes were closed, and his breathing was slow and steady. But when Yellen touched his head, his tail began to wag, and he opened his amber eyes to look at her. "Hey, buddy," she whispered through her tears. "You scared me so much. Don't ever do that again." Coda licked her hand weakly, and his tail kept wagging. He did not understand her words, but he understood her love, and that was all that mattered. Outside the room, Ambassador Thrix turned to Commander Sithax and the other delegates who had gathered. "I believe we must update our species database," he said solemnly. "The entry for human companions must be completely rewritten." Sithax nodded in agreement. "What should we write?" Thrix thought for a moment, and then he spoke words that would be remembered throughout the galaxy for generations to come. Human companions, also known as dogs. Do not mock. Do not threaten. Do not underestimate. These are not pets. These are not servants. These are oath-bound predators who have chosen their pack. They are warriors who fight without weapons. Guardians who protect without reward. Friends who love without condition. They have walked beside humanity for 40,000 years, and they will walk beside humanity for 40,000 more. They are loyal and brave and true, and they will never ever abandon their humans. The aliens listened in respectful silence. The laughter that had once filled the station was gone forever. In its place was something new. Understanding and admiration, and perhaps even a little envy. They had spent their lives building drones and breaking war beasts. But they had never known the simple joy of being loved by a creature who chose to love them. Maybe the humans were not so weak after all. Maybe their soft hearts and sentimental bonds were not signs of inferiority. Maybe, just maybe, the humans had discovered something that the rest of the galaxy had missed. The power of love. The strength of loyalty. The unbreakable bond between two species who had chosen to face the universe together. In the medical room, Yellen sat beside Coda and stroked his fur while he slept. She knew that when he woke up, everything would be different. The aliens would treat them with respect now. They would never laugh at her dog again. But that did not matter to her. All that mattered was that her friend was alive and that they would continue their journey together. "We showed them, boy," she whispered with a smile. "We showed them what we really are." And in his sleep, Coda's tail wagged one more time. Because that was what dogs did. They loved their humans through everything. Through mockery and danger and pain and fear. They loved without question and without limit. And that love was the strongest force in the entire galaxy.